For every 4 inhabitants, 1 lives in poverty. Elderly people scavenging for survival. Entire families crammed into cage homes, tiny and suffocating cubicles. Hundreds of thousands of people living in the urban hell of so-called cage homes. The housing crisis is insane, the inequality, extreme, the wealth of a few sustained by the misery of many. What happened to Hong Kong? Is it truly such a bad place to live? This is the dark side of Hong Kong. You've probably seen the statistics. Hong Kong is considered the most expensive city in the world to live in. However, what may not be so obvious is that many of its residents face living conditions that would be unthinkable in any other equally wealthy city. Hong Kong leads as the most unaffordable housing place in the world, surpassing cities known for their high costs such as New York, San Francisco, or Los Angeles. Buying an apartment would take over 20 years for an average citizen. That is if they didn't spend a penny of their income. And for renters, over 50% of income goes towards that, surpassing any other city in the world. Given these conditions, the phenomenon of so-called cage homes emerges, a cruel reality that demonstrates how far the housing crisis can go. These spaces are officially called subdivided units. They are basically Hong Kong housing units divided into even smaller spaces, often illegally, resulting in a high density of extremely small units. To give an idea of their tiny dimensions, an average apartment in Tokyo is this size. In New York, it's like this. In Paris, it's like this. In Hong Kong, it's like this. And this is the average size of a subdivided unit, also known as a cage home, which is even smaller than the average size of a standard parking space. However, this is not simply a matter of supply and demand, as if many people were competing for little space. The reality is much more complicated. Only a small part of the city is built, and only 7% is reserved for housing. The reality is that Hong Kong has plenty of space to build more homes, which would consequently lower prices. Only a quarter, a small part of its territory, is urbanized, and only 7% is designated for residential development. But strangely, this doesn't happen. Actively, they choose not to build more housing, making the housing crisis even worse. Why this choice is made? Well, that remains a mystery. For most of its history, Hong Kong was just a small fishing village on the outskirts of China, without much significance. Even after being conquered by Britain and starting to grow slowly, it seemed it would remain as insignificant as it always was. But everything changed after World War II, when the British colonial government made a radical decision that would change the course of Hong Kong's history, shaping what it is today, with its ups and downs. They chose to follow the principles of what became known as positive non-intervention, basically adopting capitalism in its purest form. The idea was that government regulations and interventions were obstacles to the economy and that the government should stay out. And they did just that. However, since these leases represent the main source of income, they need to be profitable enough to sustain the government. To ensure this, the government adopted the strategy of limiting the supply of land available for real estate development. This means that the government is incentivized to keep property prices very high because the higher the lease price, the higher the revenue generated. Thus, the government only leases a small portion of the land available for real estate development. This favors developers, as they know that any property they build will be sold at high prices, thanks to the lack of competition due to the limited land supply. This gives them an absolute monopoly over Hong Kong's real estate market. Over time, the situation has not improved. In fact, it has gradually worsened, with the poverty rate almost doubling since the 1980s. But why has this happened? Why does a city as rich as Hong Kong have such a significant number of people living in poverty, especially when unemployment is low and the economy is growing? The answer lies in the extreme wealth inequality in Hong Kong. But this inequality is not accidental. Hong Kong experienced 2 distinct waves of progress over time. Initially, in the 1950s, its development was driven by a wave of industrialization, particularly in textile manufacturing. This was facilitated by low taxes, easy access to export, and cheap labor, available thanks to millions of immigrants from China seeking employment, while textile manufacturers needed workers. This interaction created an initial prosperity for the city, but everything changed in the 1970s when China had a new leader who transformed its economy. This change represented a unique opportunity. With its connection to the UK, low taxes, English as the official language, and a deeply ingrained capitalist culture, Hong Kong became an ideal place for Western companies to invest in the Asian region. thanks to its strategic position and favorable business environment. This change completely transformed Hong Kong's economy. The production of goods began to decline, while more local companies began to focus on financial and commercial services. Although these sectors paid better salaries and offered more opportunities for advancement, they also generated fewer jobs. For those who used to work in factories, this change was difficult. They couldn't get the few well-paying, skilled jobs in the financial sector and had to accept low-paying jobs with no chance of advancement, while facing the high cost of living in one of the most expensive cities in the world, which becomes even more expensive each year. Unfortunately, the government hasn't been very helpful in assisting these people. Even after Hong Kong was returned to China in 1997, the principles of a government with little intervention still remain. The government sees its role as wealth creator, but not as redistributor, and thus is reluctant to intervene significantly in the situation. Here lies the problem. Despite Hong Kong being considered the land of entrepreneurship, the playing field is not equitable. Most of the economy is controlled by a few powerful family clans since colonial times. These families own large conglomerates that have established monopolies in key sectors such as transportation, construction, real estate, and utilities. They benefit enormously from the system and have so much influence that it is nearly impossible to start a business that goes against their interests. Furthermore, Hong Kong's position as the primary financial center of Asia is weakening. The Chinese government has exercised tighter control over the city, stripping away freedoms that citizens used to enjoy. This is affecting the value for foreign investors, and along with the loss of autonomy, there is fear that soon Hong Kong may become just another Chinese city, with skyscrapers, cage homes, and cardboard grannies as memories of its former glory. Hong Kong, a global financial hub, grapples with severe social inequality and a dire housing crisis. While a minority enjoys wealth, millions struggle in poverty, epitomized by cage homes. Government inaction and powerful family influence exacerbate these issues. China's interference adds uncertainty. The city faces a pivotal choice: perpetuate inequality or pursue reforms for a fairer society. Yet, hope persists for a brighter tomorrow.